Good evening. Concurrent meeting of the School Administrative Unit Number 12 School Board and the Londonderry School District School Board on Thursday, December 8th. Welcome. Those of you who aren't already standing and want to go home. And Susan, since you're so eager, why don't you lead?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yeah.
Let's see, John is away on business this evening, he'll be catching up with us from the minutes and the tape replay. Just as an FYI, we have another budget workshop scheduled for next Tuesday. Doing the math in my head, yeah, Tuesday, here, and an open budget workshop on the 22nd in the school board room. Tonight's agenda is special education and IT. Kim, would you like to start?
Okay. Sean and I just talked and we decided I'd do special ed and he'd do IT.
Oh.
That's a good thing.
Well, all right, but next time I'm going to need more warning on that.
Me too.
If you wouldn't mind passing one down.
Take one, pass the rest on.
Then we have the budget committee come.
Decisions.
I'll hand you the
Yes. Your floor.
Good evening. What I just passed out is a historical look at enrollment that I will get to later in my presentation, but I wanted you to have it in front of you before we began. The pupil service budget begins on page 417 of your budget book. In terms of the fiscal impact of the pupil service budget, and just to remind everyone, the pupil service budget does include costs for special education, 504, some nursing costs, and costs related to the McKinney-Vento Act, which is the act allowing students who are homeless to be educated in their neighborhood public school.
Somebody needed an act for that?
They did.
Okay.
The pupil service budget has a 4.1% increase over fiscal year 12, which is $102,411. That 4.1% increase comes from three main areas. One, projected increases in our tuition for our out-of-district students, transportation costs, and learning supplies and equipment. And I'll remind the boards and the community that the last 2 years we were fortunate enough to be able to tap into the ERA grant, the federal grant, to purchase new learning supplies and equipment. That grant has expired, and we've needed to include costs for those items back in our general fund. So some of those lines in your budget analysis indicate that the last 2 years they may have been zeroed out, and now there's a cost for FY13. Looking at the sheet that I handed to you, Nancy, my secretary, and I put together for the superintendent and for the board an 18-year history of special education enrollment here in Londonderry. And we could go back, our records that we could find went back as far as 1994. And in that year, we had 690 identified children, and that represented 15.3% of the total population in Londonderry. Those numbers peaked in 07-08, where we had over 1,000 children identified as children with disabilities, and the percentage of total enrollment went up to 18.7. Currently, for my budget report, we have 810 identified children in Londonderry, and we're making up 16.7% of the population. As I presented a few weeks ago during my State of the Union, our percentage of children identified is slightly higher than the state average. The state of New Hampshire average is 15.4% of total enrollment. And our staffing levels remain appropriate.
Kim,
Yes?
forgive me for interrupting, but every time we mention this number, I see misinterpretations of it. Can you tell us in the clearest possible terms what it means when we say 16.7% of our kids are
can.
identified?
Well, to
There-
that point, you said 16.7%
0.7%
of our population.
of our population. So there are
Well, there's
4,800
about 24,900 and something.
of our student population. We have 4,846, I believe, students enrolled in the Londonderry School District. Of that 4,800, 810 have been identified as children with a disability,
Such as?
a specific learning disability, an emotional disability, a medical condition constituting an other health impairment.
What range of things are we talking about here?
We are talking about students who have a 1 to 2 year gap in their ability to decode written word reading, that we make significant progress in closing that gap. And we're talking about students who have significant developmental disabilities, who are nonverbal, possibly non-ambulatory, who need one-on-one nursing care, who we are educating in our public school system.
What is the least level of service that somebody in this group might be receiving?
In all honesty, I think that would depend on the family's perspective, John.
Okay.
Every one of those 810 students that are identified, their disability is everything to them. It impacts them. It impacts their entire family. Probably the most clear to help remediate is a specific learning disability, because you have very clear targets, you set goals to remediate and close the gap. But if you have a specific learning disability, you have a processing disorder. You can't be identified without one, and that processing disorder is never going to go away.
Okay. So we're not talking about 17% of our kids are on the autism spectrum.
We are not, although we have a higher than average
Right.
autism population.
Okay, thanks. Nancy?
I just have a question about disabilities and identified. Do you have any children that you have, quote, identified that perhaps have challenges with reading and/or math, but do not have a disability?
No.
Okay.
2 years ago, the federal government and then the state government redefined how a specific learning disability has to be identified, Nancy, and you must have an identified processing disorder, and that's one of the first threshold questions. If that is a no, there's no processing disorder, you go right to the bottom and there's no disability.
So then I guess my question is, for those children in our district that do have, some challenges with reading and/or math that receive services, how do we fund that?
Actually, on the human impact, last bullet on the right side, RTI, we are currently providing RTI, which stands for Response to Intervention, to 171 non-identified but struggling learners.
Okay. And where does that funding come from?
It comes from the general fund. It is provided by our certified teachers in the classroom, our reading specialists, our special education teachers, and our related service providers.
So my point is that we do have services, some
Absolutely.
available for, quote, regular ed students that are struggling, that may not, quote-unquote, be identified?
Most certainly. And
Thank you.
absolutely. And your comment, Nancy, is very poignant, because when I tell you that our staffing levels are appropriate, they are. Even though enrollment numbers may look like they are going down, the number of students that we are educating and servicing through the expertise of the special education department remains close to 1,000.
Thank you.
So through all of our enrollment changes, we continue to respond via our staffing levels. I mentioned the other night, since FY10, we have reduced our administrative staff by 3 full-time equivalents. The current administrators working in the special ed department are above average. They are wonderful people who dedicate long, hard hours to their profession, and it's a credit to them that the reorganization is working as well as it is. That includes the assistant principals at the elementary level, the principals at the elementary level, who have had to take on different responsibilities, and then my own special ed directors. They're all sitting behind me, and I thank them for coming tonight as well. We have reduced our daily assistant hours over the last 3 fiscal years by 66 daily hours, or 11 bodies. We have continued to reallocate staff. We reallocate assistants, teachers, and related service providers building to building, depending on need. We have reduced 2 full-time equivalent special education teachers. And every spring, we use an assistant matrix for all of the children requiring adult support to look at what level of adult support do they require, what progress have we made, and where do they continue to require that, so that we make sure that we are in fact not overstaffed. I mentioned briefly during the State of the Union the trends and projections that I see, and immediately following my State of the Union address, the Boston Globe came out with an article that the superintendent saw and brought to my attention. And in that article, it was quoted that in 1980, the odds of surviving a premature birth were 1 in 10. 31 years later, the odds of surviving that premature birth are 9 in 10. But 50% of those survivors will have cognitive or developmental difficulties. And we are absolutely seeing that in our schools. The percent of our low-incident populations, those children on the autism spectrum, John, children with emotional disabilities, children with significant medical conditions that warrant an other health impairment identification, are increasing. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when you heard other health impairment, you immediately equated that to a child with ADHD. That is no longer the case. Here in Londonderry, we are servicing children with over 55 separate and acute medical conditions, ranging from genetic difficulties, cancer survivors, to, as I mentioned last year, things that, with my 2 years of Latin, I can try to decode, but I can't really pronounce the medical conditions that they're struggling and working with. We have 77 students on the autism spectrum. We have 91 students struggling with mental health issues.
Okay, that's 77 out of 810.
Correct.
Okay.
And we have 166 others that have some of those medical conditions I was referencing. And all of those students have case management, are getting direct instruction, and getting some myriad of occupational, speech and language, physical therapy, and counseling. About 45 to 50 of our current high school students who have an identified area of disability are staying longer than 4 years. They're able to stay through their 21st birthday. In my budget, I have continued to fund or ask for funding to maintain our Work Opportunities program. Next year, that program will help 13 students who are ages 19 to 20 finish out their educational career here in Londonderry, off campus, at job sites working on the vocational and recreation skills that by law we are mandated to provide services for. And many of them are able to, right after turning 21, turn that into, if not a paid job, a place where they can go and volunteer and bring meaning to their after high school life. I will mention that last week we went through our 2-day IEP on-site for focus monitoring. And one of the things they looked at was what we call Indicator 13, and that means, are we providing the appropriate transition plans for children age 16 and above? Last year they came and did an on-site, and there were compliance issues in the way that we were writing IEPs, our language. This year when they came, we were 100% compliant. So I was very proud of Connie and the high school staff. On page 431 to 436, you will see what I consider the highlight of my executive summary. And it's right up on the screen in the biggest font on there. The cost savings of running our in-district programs, and those are the programs that I described during my State of the Union address, are programs for children with autism, intellectual disabilities, emotional disabilities. Over an 8-year period, projecting into FY13, has saved the Londonderry taxpayers $37.8 million by being able to educate those children in their neighborhood public school, providing what I would easily debate is a better education than they could get outside of this district. We have saved $37.8 million. When I figured that number out for FY12, the current year, there are 143 children being educated in those programs today in Londonderry. Would, if we didn't have those programs, some of those 143 children still be here and not out of district? Perhaps they might. But I can also tell you that they would be here and they would not be successful. And I can tell you that the superintendent and Jason would not be able to report that the high school had a 0.17% dropout rate if those programs were not in existence here in Londonderry. We have a phenomenal staff, wonderfully supportive parents, and the entire district benefits not only fiscally, but on a humanitarian level by being able to see the gifts that those children bring to school every day. Our transportation line is going up. There is a $110,169 increase in transportation. We are currently working with Provider, who is our provider for transportation, on a 2-year extension, which is part of the current contract. And I expect to be able to come back to the board in January with the details of that 2-year extension. The rate of increase that I have budgeted for this budget remains the same as we have had during the last 5 years. Our out-of-district transportation has had less opportunities for rideshare this year due to a change in the schools that the children are going to and or the start times of some of the out-of-district programs. However, I am confident in my current budget numbers, and any adjustments through the negotiations and the contract would be brought back to the board in January. The increase in transportation is based on 2 factors. One is just an increase in the transportation cost and the cost of the monitors. We had provided and we do provide a monitor on each of our in-district buses for student safety. And so between the bus, the daily rate for the bus, and the monitor, there is an increase for next year. However, $54,810, or half of that increase, is due to my recommendation that we add an additional bus to our special transportation bus line. Our current ride time for our LEAP and kindergarten program is today well, actually it was in November, I got the data in November, is 35 to 45 minutes a run. Those buses are not full. They might have 7 or 8 children on it. Some days they might have 4, because LEAP varies their program. Some days the children go 3 days a week or 2 days a week. But right now, those runs can be as long as 45 minutes. That's a really long time for a 3 or a 4-year-old to be on a bus. Those children take longer to get on and off the bus. Often they have specialized equipment that comes on and off the bus with them. And we average about 26 additional students from September to June in LEAP every year. So those bus times are only going to get longer. In May, I project that those bus times, the routes, will be about almost an hour long for the 3 to 4-year-olds. And my recommendation to add a bus is because that is just too long for a 3 or 4-year-old to be on the bus.
Peter, what's our guideline for general ed for kindergarten? Bus length?
Which grades?
Kindergarten.
Kindergarten, we could door to door.
I'm sorry?
Door to door.
Time on the
Oh,
bus.
the time?
Yeah, what's our,
45 minutes.
I'm sorry?
45 minutes is the length.
Okay, thanks.
We are currently providing in-district transportation to 110 students. Again, by tomorrow, that could go up. And the buses are covering 3,036 miles a week in Londonderry, the current buses that we have. I'm sure if you try to drive from one end of town to the other, you know how big Londonderry is. And every year I'm learning that it's bigger and bigger than I think. Our buses are going into Derry to pick up children whose mailing addresses are in Derry, but their house is in Londonderry, Manchester, Hudson. We are hitting every corner of Londonderry. I mentioned the McKinney-Vento Act, the act that allows students who are homeless to come. We also have to provide transportation. We currently transport children from Manchester, Derry, Hudson, back to their neighborhood school in the district in Londonderry where they became homeless. And the provider does those runs for us. We also pick up emergency vocational runs as needed. When I come back to talk about the contract, I'll talk about the service that provider has provided for us. They are wonderful. They go above and beyond. Are there issues with special transportation? There always are. But we put the provider through all kinds of machinations getting children to school. We add children, we add runs. The LEAP children add throughout the year days in their program, and without blinking an eye, the provider does everything we ask them to do, and they do it immediately. Our out-of-district tuition, currently we are projecting 19 children to be educated out of district next year. In FY10, the board may remember that I had to come to you a few times throughout the year to ask for funding for children who required out-of-district programming. Last year, I did not. We are currently assessing situations as they come up during this fiscal year, but as of right now, we are projecting 19 students to require their education to be outside of the Londonderry public schools. The total tuition projected for next year is $1,297,407. And there is a chart to follow the progress of our out-of-district children on page 440 of your budget book. One thing that our in-district programs have allowed is that next year, for the first time, at least in my tenure here in Londonderry, we will have no elementary students placed out of district. We will be educating all of our elementary age population in town in their neighborhood public schools. When I presented my State of the Union, Ron had asked me specifically to talk to you a little bit about beyond the identification. I gave you and you have it in your executive summary, the primary identifications of the children that we have. And I looked beyond the identification. We have 324 students who have more than one area of disability. So they may be identified with a specific learning disability, but they have another area of disability, whether it's another health impairment, an emotional disability, an autism spectrum disorder, in conjunction. 40% of our identified group have more than one area of need that we have to provide specialized instruction for. We have 122 students that have a primary identification as speech and language. They have a language impairment, 122. But our speech and language pathologists are providing service to 322 students. And that's not including the students they're servicing through response to intervention. Our occupational therapists are providing direct instruction to 195 students, and we're providing counseling to 190. My only budget request, additional budget request for FY13 is for 3 additional hours of daily assistant time, and this is to support the individual needs of a student at North Elementary School. The total fiscal impact of these 3 daily assistant hours is $7,199. And I do just want to mention again that last week we did go through our 2-day IEP review where outside eyes came in and looked at what are we providing for programming for students here in Londonderry. They looked at 23 cases at all grade levels, leap through the high school. And it wasn't just the, did you do this on time, are you meeting your timelines? They looked at the quality of the IEP and the quality of the programming that we were providing to Londonderry. And I will say, biasly, that it went great. And I have never been as proud of my staff as I was at the end of Wednesday, where we came back into this room for the report out, and not one, not two, but several of the outside people that had come in, and they were my counterparts throughout the state. They were representatives from the Department of Ed. They were 2 facilitators from Ceresc, and there were 2 outside auditors auditing the overall process from the West Coast, all in here, and many of them telling Nate, telling myself, if there are any openings in Londonderry, they want to come. They want to come and work for us based on what they saw in our schools. It was a huge amount of work preparing for my staff. They stepped up to the plate. One of the highlights that the report out showed was that when they came and they met with the teams, they couldn't tell who was the regular ed teacher and who was the special ed teacher. That the teams were working so collaboratively that until that individual person was reporting on their own work with the student, they couldn't tell. And they were amazed at how well our regular education staff knew the students with disabilities and what they needed to provide for them in their own classrooms. It was wonderful. To have a program like we do, I am so proud to lead it. And to have it validated by outside professionals is truly an honor. And I want to thank again Connie and Denise, Deb, Jill, Ace, and Chris, who came tonight, as well as the principals who have all stepped up to take additional responsibilities to make our reorganization work. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Kim. Steve?
You indicated that the budget line items for the ERA funds have been zeroed out.
Correct.
How does that affect our default budget? How does it affect the way we calculate our default budget? And
Well-
how does it affect if the default budget were to pass?
I'll defer to Peter.
I thought you would. That's why I was looking at him.
Don't forget the default budget automatically pulls out any one-time capital item. So the majority of error when we're talking about capital expenses, if they were in their general fund, unless they were ongoing for whatever reason, they would have been pulled out when calculating the default budget, as they are when we do Booth Hill in high school and middle school. If there were other expenses and they're ongoing or they're contractual, they would have been rolled into the default budget.
What about now that they're, in particularly I'm thinking labor, there are labor components to this, correct?
To my actual budget,
To funding from the federal government.
through the IDEA grant, most of our IDEA grant goes to salaries.
Didn't I
Has there been any change in that?
I won't know what our IDEA allocation is until July, although I'll tell you that they also come and change it throughout the school year, and it hardly ever goes up. We have been told to expect a decrease in our IDEA grant.
So the impact on the school district in your area, in the area of special education, if a default budget were to pass instead of the deliberative session recommended budget, what kind of impact would there be?
Well, I think in either case, there would be, how do I say this, a small gap. If we have budgeted, I'll make it up, one person moving over from IDA based on our, I guess, of what IDA will come, and three have to be moved because of a lower amount of money that we receive. They would be moved over to the general fund, and then other lines within that
Would have to be
within
adjusted.
that $65 million budget would pick up the added costs and associated benefits and taxes.
Okay. Just one other question. The buses that we use today, it seemed to, do they all have monitors? Your buses?
My in-district buses have monitors, all of them.
Out of district?
It depends on the children that are riding. Currently, I have 3 with monitors.
My question is, I think it's good that they have monitors, based on news reports over the past half a decade or so. And sometimes, you know, you need to pay for that service. So sometimes the best deal isn't always the best deal. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Ron?
Kim, on transportation, you kind of mentioned the Homeless Act, and we have children. Do we have a breakdown of exactly what we're talking about here with the costs? I guess, I'm maybe not for here, but I guess I was not aware of the transportation to Hudson, to Manchester, to wherever, to pick up these students. How many are there that we are going at a district with these buses? I guess that was the area. And do we also, I guess your transportation budget seems to be a catch-all for a lot of things. Okay, and I guess I'd like a little bit better breakdown to understand what that budget is. We have the students that we're transporting out of district. We have our in-district transportation. We have the group of homeless also there. I think I'm reading in here, there's the Victory Baptist also that we're sending a bus out of special ed over there. And I know these are all required by law. I'd just like to understand the monies on that.
Right. The other component too, the in-district too, because there was some confusion about a year or two ago about it. The in-district costs also include in-district costs for summer school, for the extended year program for the kids. So we're not just talking
Which is also mandated.
Pardon?
Which is also
Yes.
mandated.
Yes, so we're not just talking the end of August to June. We're talking basically July through June, because we are required to provide that in-district transportation for summer. for the kids who are on extended year programs. So
Let's be real clear about this. We're not talking about the kids who go to credit recovery in the high
that's
school.
right.
Correct, it's part of their individual
I understand,
program.
I just,
Right. On page
Try to lay it out.
438, I do have a little bit of a breakdown where I at least extrapolated the summer program cost. It's very difficult to project, obviously, the students that we're transporting because of their being homeless. And those runs can be for 2 months, they can be for 8 months. I can bring you the cost of last year.
And that'll be fine.
It's also important for the board and the public to know that when there is a McKinney-Vento student, we then have the opportunity, and we do, to share that cost. If a child becomes homeless in Londonderry and are living in the shelter in Manchester, Manchester pays half of the transportation cost and we pay half. Likewise, if a child becomes homeless in Londonderry but elects to live in Peterborough, and we had that 2 years ago, that's a really long ride, but they wanted to still be educated in Londonderry, Peterborough picks up 50% of that cost. And if a child becomes homeless in Derry, but are living with friends here in Londonderry, and they're going back to school in Derry, because that's where they want to go to school, they became homeless in Derry, we pay half of that cost on Derry's behalf.
who gets
That's
the
the way the
adequacy
law
money?
is written.
Good thing nobody becomes homeless in Bermuda.
Yeah.
Who gets the adequacy money in a case like that?
Wherever the child is enrolled in school.
That's what I figured. Thanks.
And
Keep in mind, there's no transportation
Right.
funding in the adequacy funding.
Of course not.
John, can I just, one more thing,
course.
I totally forgot. On the slide that I put up, I did put that we have 828 identified students. Since the time that I needed to turn this in to the superintendent to get it to you on time for Thanksgiving, we have an increase of 18 children. So as of today, there are 828 identified students. And I did put the average, and this is a 3-year historical look that I'm now keeping as we go through the years, of how many children we either increase or decrease at each level throughout the school year, September to June.
Give us some insight into your life. How does that happen? I mean, that's what, 2 weeks?
Any one of us would come follow us. We're like a reality
No,
TV
seriously.
show.
What kind of events can transpire over that short a time to have that big an impact?
Move-ins. We've had some students move. You wouldn't think that November is a big time to move, but there have been move-ins. But also children who are identified. They were referred in September, perhaps. Either they were new to our district from over the summer, or at the end of last year, the teams felt like they weren't making the progress they wanted them to make, and so they were referred at the beginning of the year. The testing and evaluation process took place. We have 45 days from parent consent to evaluate to determine whether or not they're eligible, and that's where you get those numbers.
Thanks.
Kim, I think there's another important point I'd like you to make. With the change in the state's special ed regulations regarding the identification of preschool kids,
Yes.
that basically a new category, and how much time that takes?
Right. There's the brand new memorandum of understanding. Lynn emailed that to me this morning, and I will confess I have not had time to open it and read it. But in that new memorandum of understanding, there is language that a student who is probable for identification needs to be evaluated. So a child who is getting early supports and service, which means they are newborn to age 2, if there is a probable likelihood that they will require special education or specialized instruction when they turn 3, Lynn and her team has to do a full evaluation. That can take up to 30 hours start to finish, where Lynn meets with the early supports and service team, the family. They have a transition meeting. They have a disposition of referral meeting. The evaluation has to occur, the evaluation meeting, and the writing of an IEP, and it all has to happen before the child turns 3. Lynn and her team and Kim with the 4-year-olds are masters at what they do, because these are parents who are hearing all of this for the first time with their babies. These are 2.5-year-old children, they're babies, and they're going through a very difficult and emotional process.
Ron, anything else?
I guess I see the monitors for 6.5 hours. How do we use the monitor? Is that an all-day job?
It's an all-day job off and on. You asked that last year, so I got some figures for you.
Thank you. I'm getting old, I just don't remember the answer.
I didn't have all the answers. I didn't have all the answers last year, but I do now. Not being able to put my hand, I have it in here. But there are buses that run different times. Our buses start at about 6 in the morning to get our high school students, and the same 8 buses run until about 4:30, dropping off all of our elementary and out-of-district students. The monitors are we're only being charged while the bus is running, in motion. So there are some monitors that are getting charged for about 7 hours a day, because they're running a lot of the routes. They're running a high school route all the way through to the last Moose Hill route. Some of the buses, the monitors are only on for about 5 hours, because they don't have all 3 levels of routes for that bus. The average is 6.5. But I have a spreadsheet that I can get you that literally has each one of the buses and how long the monitor is on the bus.
Okay, so we're only paying for the time that they're on the bus running.
Running on the bus, not even for when they're on the bus coming to Londonderry. It's when they are driving in Londonderry.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Ron. Nance?
I have a couple of questions. I'm almost hesitant to ask this because I find it shocking that we're talking about homeless children going to school.
You want to clarify that?
Homeless children, meaning that we have homeless children
Okay.
coming to school? As in, they don't have homes? Much clearer do you want me to make it, John?
The part
That they don't have a home?
I was going for was, how dare those homeless children come to school?
Well, that might be your perspective, but that wasn't mine. So here's my question. So here's my question. Can you tell us how many homeless students we have? And sadly, are you seeing this as being a trend?
I can tell you that as of today, there are 7 students that, through my role as the McKinney-Vento liaison, it sounds horrible, it's a horrible conversation to have, but
That's exactly right,
declared
which is my
homeless.
point.
That's what I have to formally do. There could be many more. It's a very difficult thing for families to come. The principals know. The principals are often the ones who find out first, or the school nurse. It's horrible and humbling. And it's humbling to be in their presence, because they're doing everything they can, these parents, to make sure that their children's education is uninterrupted.
Sure.
Is it increasing? I can tell you my first year, it's my 4th year in my current role, and I had none my first year and a half here. So it's increasing.
Okay. And then I have just a couple of questions about out-of-district placement. Currently, you indicated that we have 19 children that we're sending out of district. I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. You certainly have no control over students that move into the district that require services that we cannot accommodate. So conceivably, we could have one, or we could have several students move into the district that require services that we don't have, that we would have to send them out of district.
So go ahead.
So my question is, do you have any kind of a slush fund? And if the answer to that is no, where does the funding come from?
You're right, I have no control over that, although I will say we've had students move in who have gone to out-of-district placements at the district they moved from, and we have been able to bring them back to public school. We had a situation at the high school last year. A high school student moved in. They were not able to go to their public school where they were, but they were able to be successful at Londonderry High. There is a special education fund, trust fund, if there was ever a catastrophic emergency. But typically what I do is when I do have a situation that is unbudgeted, I come before the board in non-public and request the funding that we need in order to educate that child.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Todd?
Thank you. Obviously, you know, the special ed program has proven itself in terms of what your skills are and ability to save a lot of money. This 19 students being having to go out of district, has there been any repetition there enough so that we could perhaps do some of the, you know, provide some of the services needed in-house, saving some money? Is there any opportunity for that, or is there just, you just so intermittent you can't really plan for that type of service?
If I understand your question correctly, I think we have. Several of the students of those 19 went out of district when they were at the LEAP kindergarten or early elementary age. And once they have gone out of district, it becomes very difficult to bring them back. We have, and we always try to when appropriate. But what we learned from that is that we needed different kinds of programming at that level. And that's what I believe we have built capacity for, and why now, next year, we don't have any of that age group going out of district.
So it's a continuity thing for the student?
For the student that once they've gone out, it's more difficult to bring them back, yes.
So you want to maintain continuity with what they've been doing and continuous?
Right, for several factors. But there have been children that we have been able to bring back, and we do when we can.
Okay,
Right.
okay.
And then there are also students that have left our district to be educated outside of the district because of disciplinary issues.
Okay.
And so bringing them back may not be an option.
Okay. Changing the subject a bit, the 171 RTI,
Yes.
the ones that you need to intervene, typically, do many of these type of students that you need to make sure you take care of, do they become on the special ed role in terms of, you've identified, you're into the process, like, oh, guess what? Now
Right.
they've been identified now, later into the program, so, into their education, so now they're being identified. Is that what frequently happens? So potentially a subset of that 171 could be in addition to the 828?
I would say maybe 5 or 8%.
Oh, okay.
It's a small number. What we are seeing is the number of children identified as having a specific learning disability is decreasing, and part of that reason is because of RTI. It's doing its job, it's getting in there early, remediating the gaps, and helping kids so that they don't become students that require specialized instruction.
I see, I see. So in essence, just a very small amount of that 171 typically would become considered as some form of special education requirement.
Correct. Maybe 3 or 4 at each of the elementary schools during the course of the year.
And all 171 is funded through the special ed?
Through the general
Budget.
fund, because
through the general
it's
fund.
really all of our educators that work together on RTI. What I wanted to highlight is that while our special education numbers are declining, and I've already talked about severity increasing, our caseloads are good, they're manageable numbers, but our staff is also servicing these 171 other children
Great.
within their day.
And one final question, if I may. Obviously, you know, you identify this $37.8 million in savings. That's over the course of 8 years, I believe you stated.
Correct.
Could you just give some examples of exactly how that is calculated? Just to
Absolutely.
remind the public exactly, because a lot of people look at that number and they say, yeah, right. So I'm saying, yeah, right. Let's show you why, and let's explain a little bit as to how you come up with that $37.8 million. I think that's a significant indicator as to the excellent management of the department and how we educate our special ed students. And I think we've also proven, if I may continue a little further, that in fact the enrollment overall is not increasing over time, as some people have alluded to in the public that I've talked to. So that's a good metric to actually refer back to. So we're not seeing an increase as a result of our excellent program. It's just we do a really good job, we save a lot of money, and I'd like to remind the public some examples of how we do that.
I will gladly help you remind the public. I'm really proud of how we derived that number because I think it's a real honest number. For example, I take our ACT program, which is our program at Londonderry High School for children with intellectual disabilities. 21 children are in the program. I take those children and I divide them up and I say, where would I send them if I could not educate them here in Londonderry? I took 11 of them and I sent them to the Merrimack Educational Collaborative in my mind. And I took 10 and I sent them to the Monarch School in my mind. I probably wouldn't be that lucky and be able to just divide them in half and send half and half. And I say that lucky because then I figure the tuition for those 11 at MEC and the 10 at Monarch, and I think if I'm sending them to only 2 schools, I only need 2 buses, and I'll put them all on the bus, because that would also not happen.
Yeah.
So that's a conservative number. I take the tuition and the transportation, and I add that together to get a figure. In the case of ACT, it's $1,463,000. I subtract from that number the cost of our staff, their full salary, including benefits, for the 4 teachers and all of the assistants in that program. Again, for ACT, it was $426,717, and I come up with a net cost savings. Again, it's conservative because all of those kids are getting speech and language, occupational therapy, they're getting work opportunities, and all of those services may or may not be included in that tuition. Often it's a la carte when you go out of district.
And that floor space of that school would still exist. It's fixed anyway, right? So those costs you wouldn't be able to net that out of it.
Right.
So those overhead associated costs with that, it becomes neutral. So it's really an honest number.
It is an honest number.
Thank you.
Your floor, Todd.
John?
Kim, the $37.8 million that we've saved by not putting kids out of district placement, you mentioned earlier that outside eyes come in, I guess some auditors, and look at IEPs and see if those are appropriate. Do we have people who come up from the outside to assess whether kids being sent for outplacement could be kept in district, or vice versa, that we're not sending kids out that should be sent out?
We have not had that, an outside look at that. I will tell you that the families that are involved in both our out-of-district and our in-district populations are families who are well-versed in what they're doing. They are researched. They often have doctors and outside therapists part of their team, advocates. And so by default, there are a lot of outside eyes looking at what we do.
How much does the parents' role play? Because I can imagine there are situations where the parents want the kid integrated and others where they want nothing but that kid placed in the program that they've handpicked. How much of a role does that play?
Parents are equal members of the IEP team, and we can't make a decision on placement where they're going without the parent being, first of all, part of that discussion, and second of all, they're the ones who ultimately have to agree or disagree. If I get a request from a parent to look for an out-of-district placement for their child, my question is simple. It's two-pronged. Is the IEP appropriate? So have we written an appropriate plan? And if we have, can we implement it here? If we can implement it in district, then my answer to that parent is no, we have an appropriate placement here. If we can't, that's when I come to the board and say we've reached a point where we need to look outside of the district.
If there's a disagreement, ultimately who decides that? Is there an arbitration process? Or?
There is.
Okay.
For the district, ultimately, it's the IEP team, and then ultimately it's the local education agency representative, the fiscal agent. I get involved. But there is an arbitration process. It's called alternative dispute resolution. We've used it with families very successfully. The first level of that is neutral conference. Then we can go to mediation, which is voluntary, but you come out with a binding agreement. And if that is unsuccessful, then there is a hearing officer that will come in and do what is called a due process hearing.
How often does that process have to be used, and who pays for that?
We pay for our attorney's fees. Attorneys are typically involved. Parents pay for their own attorney fees unless they win that through due process. I am very happy to say that in my 4 years, and even prior when I was the coordinator and the director at the middle school, this district has been involved in due process once that I'm familiar with, and none in my tenure as director. However, we use mediation several times throughout each year.
Are there any additional federal resources that we can look at trying to recover? I mean, I was surprised a couple of years ago to learn that children can be SSI recipients. And, you know, with the increasing homeless population numbers you talked about, are there any other grants or programs that we can tap into that we're not looking at yet, or we're starting to get into?
We're already tapping into Medicaid to Schools program. That money is getting, like all other monies, harder and harder to get. There are different rules every year that get implemented. We did go through a Medicaid to Schools audit, a state audit, last year, and the findings were very complimentary to the district. But that is money that we do go after for revenue. And other than our IDEA entitlement, there's no other additional funding sources that I'm aware of that we're not tapping into.
Okay, thank you.
Just to tap onto the outside funding sources, I think we mentioned at a previous meeting the state walking back from their commitment on catastrophic aid. And it used to be that the state would start to pay 80% of the difference between 3.5 times average per pupil cost. And what's the cap on it, Kim?
The cap, the 10%.
Right. So, and what the state would do would pay, in essence, it was 80% of the difference between 3.5 and what the cost was.
Which is about $45,000 you have to reach the 3.5.
And this year, their contribution is 61% instead of the 80%. And that comes a year after the money is expended. So, you know, Kim has done, I think, a fantastic job in garnering outside funding. The efforts that go into Medicaid reimbursement, significant. The efforts that go into codifying and vouching for and auditing all the costs that is associated with catastrophic reimbursement are significant, as well as effective utilization of the IDEA monies. So, you know, I think Kim and the staff have done an excellent job in trying to maximize our return. The problem is that maximizing the return, it's a smaller pot of money, in which comes back to the district, whether it's IDEA or CAT aid or Medicaid reimbursement.
Thank you.
Lisa and then Chris.
Hi. I'm interested in exactly what spectrum of students that we're covering. And are there students who actually require medical assistance in order to attend school, who need medical aids to attend them? Do we have students who are in that condition?
We do. In terms of, let me answer probably the easiest part of your question. I just want to get the correct number for you. Currently, we have 2 students that we are educating in their home because they are so medically fragile, they are unable to come to school. That number can fluctuate. There are students who have ongoing medical conditions that can have acute flare-ups that are home for a period of time, and we provide service in the home. We do have students that require nursing care throughout the day. We have 3 students that we provide all-day nursing care for, and then we have students who require intermittent nursing care, whether it's through an LNA that we contract to come in, or through our school nurses who are very involved in the children's programming. In terms of the spectrum of disabilities, we have students who could be sitting in this room right now and you would never know it. that they struggle with a type of disability. And we have students that are in wheelchairs who require support for feeding tubes, breathing apparatus, who are nonverbal, who may or may not be able to communicate through assistive technology, whether it's buttons or computer programs to speak for them. We have students with, who are deaf and hard of hearing or who are visually impaired.
So this is a very complex level of care, and I'd like to congratulate you. The program is just very impressive. I had another question about transportation. Do you use video monitoring at all on these special needs buses?
We currently do not have video monitors on our in-district buses. However, there have been circumstances at times on our out-of-district buses where we have installed video cameras if the need warrants it.
And this is just to provide safety and security, and so if there's any question of what happened, there's a record there.
Correct.
for
Yeah.
your- And then I have one other change of subject. You mentioned your other area of increase was new equipment. What is that in particular?
That can be equipment for students in our self-contained programs, the assistive technology devices that I mentioned, from a very simple Go Talk, it's called, that might have 4 icons that the child presses, to really complicated, almost like iPad type of devices where the child does all of their communication through the computer and it speaks for them, to FM systems, which are sound amplifiers for children who are either deaf, hard of hearing, or who have central auditory processing disorders, or occupational therapy equipment. Our autistic spectrum population have a lot of sensory needs, and they take sensory breaks, and they need equipment to help them get that break, that kind of thing.
And is this a new account, or is this an ongoing, this is adding to what we
Yep.
have?
An ongoing account every year. There are new equipment needs that come up. Children outgrow their technology device or their FM system, or we need new equipment. We were fortunate enough that we were able to use federal dollars the last 2 years and did not have to impact the general fund with that type of equipment.
That's great news. It would be lovely to hear more of that. Thank you, Kim.
Can I jump in for a second? Is there any aspect of that that's picked up by private medical insurance of the students?
We do have students whose assistive technology device has been purchased through their Medicaid program. We keep very careful records in that case because the student owns that. And when they turn 21 or move out of district, that goes with them. If we purchase it, then it does not leave the district and may or may not get recycled. 15 years later, it may not be the right appropriate equipment, but we keep it in district.
Chris?
I'm going to piggyback on Lisa with the transportation and nursing. Just doing some quick math, the non-identified students are about $473 to transport. The identified students are about $8,000 per student to transport, which is a staggering difference. And I understand it's not all equal. But one of my questions with that number, because like Ron said, it seems to be a catch-all. There's a lot of different things in that number. I do work for a home health agency in the interest of full disclosure, so I know what it costs to send a nurse to a school. It's contract. If they're riding the bus from home to school, is that included in your transportation budget, or is that in a different line somewhere else?
That's in a different line. We do have one situation where we do have to have adult support riding the bus for a student, and that is in the salary account.
Okay, so it's not in this. Okay.
Nope.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Kim, I'm kind of reluctant to raise this because if people are surprised to hear there are homeless families in Londonderry, this might really be a shocker. But there are, from time to time, people who express these two statements. One, we spend all this money on special needs kids. Why don't we have an equal program for exceptional children? And the other is, why do we spend this money on kids who aren't going to contribute to the economy in a meaningful way on a long-term basis at all? Wouldn't it be better for society to be Spartan about it. Now, I've already been painted as Dr. Mengele tonight, so, you know, lay it on me, but
I'll answer that
what's
for
the
you.
response to some of this?
I mean, we do have a gifted and talented program here in Londonderry. So that answers question number one. Question number two, I could take the coward's way out and say the law requires it.
No, I
but
don't
I
think
won't.
you're gonna.
I'll take the ethical way out.
Yeah.
How can we not? How can we not, as a society in the United States of America, not share the joy and the burden of our whole population? How can we not? They deserve it. They have much to offer, much to give. I would welcome, if I could, but I can't because of confidentiality, for those people who had doubts to spend a day with Lindsay Chase educating our pals children, with Shannon Ducret in the Friends Room. The magic, the inspiring things that those children accomplish, how can we not educate them and spend the money to do it?
Good, thank you.
And if I could add one other item to that. When we talk about the full spectrum of special ed students, and so it runs the entire spectrum, all kids from learning disabled to kids with multiple physical handicaps and other health impaired. Just like to remind everyone that the statistics from last year's graduating class, 75% of the kids that were coded that graduated last year went on to 2- and 4-year colleges.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Anything else from anybody? Lisa?
I just have an anecdote that a number of years ago, a governor who is not the current governor was reviewing local budgets and made the comment that he thought that some communities spent way too much money on special education. And I immediately, having been on the school board back in the 70s, I didn't speak to him personally, but I was very concerned because I thought, these are decisions that every community makes on its own. Back in those days, we had our school district meeting. People came in and took the microphone, and believe me, every year special education budget was discussed, and every year it was increased because this community, among all others, has made a consistent and long-standing commitment to this community of children. And I just thought to myself, this is where the business model that is often touted as a great thing to bring into the political sphere really doesn't work, because in a business model, the CEO says, well, you're spending too much money on special education, whereas in a democracy, the truth is the voters get to make that decision every single year. And I'm very proud to be in a community that supports a quality program like this. So, thank you.
Thank you. And to your point also, our per pupil special education cost is 22.4%, and that includes all of the salary lines, and comparatively 21% nationally. So we're right in line with what's going on nationally. But I think if you compared our programs to what's going on nationally, we are way above the curve.
Great. Anybody? Okay, thank you, Kim.
Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks very much. Moving right along.
We're doing the IT piece, right?
Just
Just wanted to be clear about that. I know
Let's just put them off a few meetings.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Peter's handing out a couple of pages here that I printed out for you. And I wanted to do something a little bit different tonight. It was just a couple of weeks ago that I did my State of the Union and knocked this over. And that was really the same sort of presentation I did last year. So I wanted to do something a little bit different tonight.
Bless you.
So I have two different things going on here. I have a slide here with 3 live Twitter feeds on it. One from Londonderry NH, one from Londonderry Schools, and one from myself at Sean Coe. And you can, if you look over on the right, there's a little Twitter voting section. You can vote. If you like my presentation or if you like my tie, you can vote warmer. And if you feel otherwise, please don't cast a vote. I'm just kidding. You know, and really there's two things here with me. Part of it is an experiment just to see if I could get this to work and to see if I could embed some social media in a live presentation. But the other part of it was to see, with very little effort in terms of marketing this, if I could get any traffic at all. So it was interesting to see. Before today, I had one Twitter follower, and it was my wife.
It's because you're private.
The other thing I have going on here in the top right-hand section is some bullet points that I took from an article that Miss Colton sent me. And it was a summarization from another article that's cited over here, I think properly, on the left, called Stretching Your Technology Dollar by Doug Johnson. And I want to use this as the framework for my presentation. Anytime I read one of these articles, I have a little bit of skepticism and a little bit of anxiety that, oh my God, what are we doing here? But this particular article really hit home with me because a lot of the bullet points, really all of the bullet points that are noted here, are things that I think we do pretty well. And the first page of the handout that I gave you is just a printout of this slide. The second page is the article with a little bit more detail. And these are actually excerpts of it that are summarized in another article called the Marshall Memo. All right, so the first bullet is use of effective budgeting techniques. So it seems like a good time to talk about the budget piece, the lines in Munis. My budget begins on page 578. It is, and this is the Munis section of it. And again, I want to do something a little different. All of the detail I presented in the State of the Union is included in my executive summary. So if you have any questions about that, please let me know. My budget this year is $412,000. It's up $5,500, or 1.3% from last year. The budget really covers only a small handful of things. It covers our software, licensing and service agreements. It covers repair of equipment, maintenance of equipment, and supplies. And it also covers new and replacement equipment. These lines, we've shifted some things from the lease into the operating budget, but the lines have basically remained very constant since I came here in 2007. Really, there are only two lines that have any significant variance in my budget at all. The first one is software. That's down $25,000 or 55%. And it's all related to the Microsoft annual agreement. We have an umbrella agreement with Microsoft. We pay them an annuity every year to cover all of the Microsoft products we buy, the operating system, Office, the server tools, the development tools, the database tools. And just this year, Microsoft has decided they're going to change the way they license things. We are now following the higher ed model. So instead of paying per...
Susan just went up.
Oh, I haven't been monitoring the feed. If anything interesting happens there.
Oh, did you just...
My mood meter actually went up too, so that's good. Microsoft is now licensed.
Kim saying, "Good luck, you have a hard act to follow."
Well, John, you know what's really ironic about that is she tweeted that before the presentation started, before her presentation started. But it turns out I did have a hard act to follow. Okay, the Microsoft line is down $25,000. They changed the way they license. We follow the higher ed model, so instead of paying per user, per machine now, we're paying based on their FTE formula. So the end result is the cost goes down for the same product. I have one line that's significantly up, $27,000. That's replacement equipment. It's 26%. And that is all related to the replacement machines we buy. Now, I have a desktop refresh schedule that's been in place for a number of years. According to that, we buy 140 machines every year, and the schedule is included in the backup packet in the budget book. But because of the budget mess at the state level last year, we dropped the number of machines I requested from 140 to 100. So this year, I'm requesting the 140 again, and that accounts for the difference, the $27,000 in that line. I do have 3 items in the lease, which is on page 594. A replacement file server, and just like with desktops, we do have a replacement schedule for servers that projects out over years. This file server's been on there for a while, and it falls under the adage, if you give them space, they're just going to use it. So we're looking to replace that this year. Looking to add 20 netbooks for the high school library for them to use for checkout, not take-home checkout, but checkout during class period in the library. And I'd like to replace the training lab at the middle school. That lab has a number of machines that are problematic, and we're finding that really none of the machines can adequately hold a battery charge anymore. You know, the other item from Mr. Johnson's memo here is to make sure that besides what is the actual effective budgeting techniques is that it'll be aligned with district goals. And one of the things that we try to do here is use the strategic planning process to plan out what our needs are, and we use the budget to reflect what we've planned. So I'd like to think we've done okay on that bullet. Along the same lines, the other sheet that I've presented to you is an itemized list of the cost savings. I've got $772,970 in total since I've been keeping track of this statistic. The list is in front of you is $129,636 this year. The items include E-rate of $12,600, purchase of netbooks, which we do almost exclusively now, and those are ranging about $500 less than a comparable full-size laptop. Purchase of thin clients to support the one-to-one classrooms, of which we have 3 now. That's about $500 each. Our student internship, which has been a very successful program for us, one that we use every summer to build all the equipment that we buy, the desktop equipment, saves us about $200 a machine. And we had 100 machines last year. We normally have 140. We continue to see excellent craftsmanship with those machines. We have very little issues, really no issues related to the assembly of them. And then we have a litany of internally developed software, which we're very proud of because it gives us the opportunity to specifically design something that's going to be specifically fit the needs here, and it also saves a good chunk of money. Our bulk emailer, I think I mentioned 2 weeks ago at my State of the Union, just passed its 1 millionth email. Curriculum mapping software, equivalent purchase price, if you could find it, is somewhere around $25,000. We have internally developed software at $10,000. Benchmark and assessment software at $1,000 and $10,000 respectively. Document management system, which document management software, which we're using for special ed now at all the buildings, and that's $10,000 and another $1,000 annually. The strategic plan software, which I would argue the value of that in terms of time savings far exceeds the $2,000 it would cost to purchase something commercially. And the student digital portfolios, which have been in place for quite some time. Okay, that concludes bullet number 1 on our slide here. Mr. Johnson's second bullet, take advantage of group buying power. We do competitively bid all of our major purchases. Right now we have 24 vendors on our bid list, and that list is continually growing. I'm happy to send a bid to anybody that wants to compete for our business. And we do find that we have very competitive pricing on the bids that we send out. We do look at purchasing co-ops around, if you will. NISTE is one of those, and they sometimes have group prices or deals that they've worked out with vendors like HP or Microsoft. Which, was there another funny one up there?
Yes. This is really bad because we find this more probably interesting than all this other dry material.
Nancy, I don't find that bad at all.
It's kind of like Janos bringing candy.
You know?
Takes your mind out. You guys know what I'm talking
Well,
about.
I have to admit, first I decided I want to put this up there to see if I can do it, and then you get so enamored with it that, well, there you go. You know, so the point is we have worked with other area schools to try to leverage vendors like X2. Nashua might need a particular report in X2, and we might need a different one. We'll each buy one, and you know, X2 is often willing to swap those with us. Okay, I'm going to combine the next 2 items into one: practice sustainable technology and purchase the right tool for the job. This is something we've talked about quite a bit here. We always take a careful approach and pride ourselves on the Yankee adopter ideal. We have a solid process in place that we use to determine what we're going to buy. We have building level tech committees to vet and prioritize their initiatives. Those in turn are reviewed and vetted by the district tech committee, school board, and then through this budget process. And we have also used extensively with any new pieces of technology our action research efforts to determine the efficacy of the technologies we have. So I think these two bullets actually represent one of our greatest strengths and certainly most entrenched tactics. I'm going to combine the next two as well, take advantage of free software and use of the cloud. We've actually made quite a bit of progress into the use of freeware in the last few years. Most notably this year is with Google Apps. The junior class at the high school, which is somewhere around 400, all have Google Apps accounts that they're using to collaborate and share documents. We have a team at the middle school that's doing the same thing. And I'm working with administrators at all the levels to build Google Apps forms that they're going to use to streamline teacher walkthroughs. There is a litany of other smaller programs that are freeware that we use, Paint.net, Logster, Animoto. The litany of software that we have on the info site is stuff that we developed. Our VPN solution is free. I started this year with a little DO team meeting that we have, the use of Blackboard. Blackboard gave me a free version of their site called Course Sites that we're using to pilot course management software with a DO virtual team meeting. Audacity is another one of these. In terms of move to the cloud, this is going to be a slow transition and really a scary one for schools. We are very concerned about our data and the integrity of our data and the security of our data. But we have started to make steps that way. Certainly the stuff that we see on Google Apps is a traditional based cloud. Enforce standardization through single point purchasing. Well, we do have a relatively standardized desktop configuration.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Why would we want to move to the cloud? Or why wouldn't we just, why would we as a district want to make that move?
There's going to be, I think there's going to be some areas where saving the storage space makes sense, and also having access to the data from anywhere with ease over the web makes sense. I'm not sure that I would advocate moving X2 to the cloud, or that I would advocate moving Munis to the cloud. But I think that there are opportunities to move some other things in that way. I think Google Apps is a perfectly appropriate cloud-based solution.
Not student records.
When you start to get into anything that's confidential, it's a scary proposition.
Why would we even consider something? I guess I'm
not suggesting that I'm considering moving student records to the cloud. Just that there are things out there that are going to move in that direction. Course management software, if you're going to use course management software, something like Moodle or Blackboard, as a way to have a blended classroom or even an online class, is a move to the cloud. And it doesn't really have any confidential data on it.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Enforce standardization. We do have a relatively standardized desktop configuration. We have a standardized server platform. We have standardized network devices and switch configurations. We've consolidated services as much as possible. Info has really become a go-to place for people in the district. X2 continues to expand its offerings. I mentioned that we're looking at a Blackboard solution, but X2 is also actively working on course management software. So eventually, I think we'll start to see a consolidation of services into the products that we already have. It sort of maximizes the investment we've spent in those, and it's also easier for management, and it's easier for users. We did also this year consolidate our web filtering and antivirus with Sophos.
It says, "I like your tie, Daddy."
Isn't that a great one?
Thank you, Amelia. Oh, no, I'm sure I got that one right. Okay. Maximize E-rate funding is very easy. We've been doing E-rate for as long as I was here, and I know Ms. Ballard was doing it for a long time before I was here. We get E-rate reimbursement of about $12,600 annually, and that covers telecommunication services, landline phones, and cell phones, and it also covers our internet connectivity. We are reimbursed at about 40% of the total cost, and the reimbursement rate is calculated by U.S. schools and libraries based on our free and reduced lunch counts. And I believe we are in the lowest category. Get rid of outdated stuff is one of my favorite things. And, you know, this is a balancing act because we try to hold on to things as much as possible and get as much life out of them as possible. But we also know at some point there are data projectors we don't buy anymore. There are CRT monitors we don't buy anymore. There are TVs we don't buy anymore. Not only because they're outdated, but many of these items are very energy inefficient. And I can tell you that in terms of the CRT monitors, this has been a long, slow haul, but we are almost out of them district-wide, which will be a very happy day for me.
Why is that? No, why happy?
They're energy inefficient, they're so big, they take up a ton of desk space. I get dizzy when I look at the flickering on the screen of those. You know, the problem is all of the CRT monitors we have are 10 years old. They're older than the person who tweeted about my tie. So the picture quality of them is terrible. Anytime there's a power outage, I'm going to lose 10 of those old CRT monitors. They're just sort of a pain for me. So I'll be glad to see all of those go. Provide sufficient training. This is something I work with Andy on, and I just got a couple highlights from Joe's training. This school year, her workshops have crossed all levels and include topics like teacher web pages, smartboard use, new teacher training, Google Apps, Audacity, Photo Story. These total almost 800 hours with about 300 people in attendance. I looked at the last 5 years. She's kept really good statistics on this. In the last 5 years, she's averaging about 1,350 hours of training every year. So certainly that's a key role in making sure that our technology is used appropriately. And anyone at this point that's going to get a new smartboard, for example, is required to go through the training on the smartboard. That really concludes my presentation. I really missed if there was any exciting tweets up there. But I am very happy to see that my mood meter is way over to the right now. You do have to take 6 off that. I voted for myself a few times to make sure that it worked. I want to thank Ms. Colton for sharing this article with me, too. I really wanted to do something a little bit different tonight because I've done this State of the Union thing just a couple of weeks ago in the last 2 times. So I appreciate the framework that article provided for me. This time I'd ask what questions you have of me. Yes. I'm sorry for this sort of blockade here. I feel like I'm...
Yeah. Sean, I don't know if this is your budget or if it's the library and the video budget, which I missed the other night because I was at my son's performance, but is your budget responsible for the computers that the children start learning on at the elementary level?
Yes.
Okay.
All of the computers are in mine.
Okay. My question is, I subbed in the schools for a couple of years, and those notebooks seem to take a beating. So I just want to know, how are they all functioning? Do you have any that are
well,
on the
we're
verge
actually
of
lucky.
being,
We have
need to be replaced?
The elementaries are in relatively good shape at this point. We transitioned away from the Macs starting, was that 4 years ago now? So all of the classroom desktop computers are no older than that.
Okay.
And the netbooks, each elementary school has 2 netbook labs. And we've been replaced, well, we've added the second lab over the last 3 years. And beyond that, the first lab in any of the schools is no more than 3 years old. So certainly some of those do take a beating, but at this point they're all relatively new and are in pretty good shape.
Okay, thank you.
We don't know yet what the ultimate life span of those netbooks are. They're still too new
Sure.
to know what the ultimate life will be.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Steve? No? Todd?
Yeah, thank you, John. The X2 annual support,
Yes.
$56,000.
Yes.
That $56,000 must be, we must be doing something to help offset that in terms of savings of communication, that otherwise we would have to go out to parents. Is there any idea how much we save for spending $56,000 for X2?
Well, X2 covers all of our student information needs. It does the grading, it does the attendance, it does conduct, it does report cards, it does transcripts, it covers our parent portal, it covers our student portal.
Gee,
Our
sounds like we
special
don't
ed-
need teachers anymore.
Special ed information is in there. Well, somebody's got to put that data in there. So I'm not sure if I could categorize what it would save, but I can tell you that it really covers all the student information stuff that we do. And back when we bought this originally, one of the considerations was there was no upfront licensing costs for X2. Some of the competitors were, in the neighborhood of 200,000?
Yes.
And the average support for those was somewhere in the neighborhood of 35,000. So and maybe it's more at this point.
Oh, sure.
So it's a big chunk of money we spend on X2, but it does cover, everything that we do. And what we get with that is the right to use licensing, and we get really good support from the vendor.
And a separate question, thank you for that. Separate question is, where would I find smartboard purchases on your?
That is in Andy's section of the lease. So it's
Okay.
somewhere just before page 594, which is where my section of the lease begins. And I don't have that.
I was just wondering how many you had slated this year.
We'll get it for you in a second.
So I'm
Okay.
589,
589?
589.
it's like 9.
And the request for those came through building technology committees. They were vetted there. And normally, they're vetted at the technology committee also, but, once a piece of technology becomes quote-unquote approved, vetted through the Action Research Project, and they just come through the regular budget.
So I'm trying to find it on 589.
89, right on the top.
Okay. So none of those. And, only that. And 140, back on page 580, I have 140 replacement computers.
Yep.
Is there any opportunity to refurbish existing ones, or is that they're just too far gone?
Most of the ones that we retire are too far gone.
Okay.
A lot of our repair money goes to refurbishing ones during the year, to either get them through the year or to get them through several more years.
Okay, so in the 140, is there a sense that we might be able to get away or squeak by with maybe another year with only getting another 100 or 120 versus 140? Can we do so? I'm just trying to see
Yep.
if we can do anything there.
Yep. Well, my opinion is that the high school does need the 140. They are a little bit behind because the previous years, not this year, but the previous years, most of the machines were dedicated toward transitioning the max set of the elementaries. And we did cut the 40 out this year. So my opinion is we do need the 140. If it was 120, we would make it work, but I certainly have 140 machines that need retiring.
And what kind of machines were you planning on?
To buy?
Yeah.
We buy parts every summer, and we have a group of student interns from Steve Downey's computer repair class assemble those parts into machines.
So just the parts cost $650?
The
In
parts,
software?
the parts, the monitor, and the Microsoft licensing.
Okay.
And I have in my backup a quote that I got from a local vendor who's quite competitive historically on these, that represents the configuration we buy. And our sort of model here, based on our desktop refresh schedule, is that we're going to buy a little bit higher end machine. We're going to put it in a lab because that's where the highest demand is. And then we're going to hand the lab machines down to classroom machines. And we find we buy a little bit higher in machine in the beginning, and we can get a little bit more life out of it in the end.
Sure.
And when the truth of the matter is, when you're buying parts, the cost differential isn't that great between a motherboard of this level and a motherboard of this level.
Yeah, certainly. I was just looking at the $650 cost and thinking you could almost buy a machine at this day and age for that, and then add to it.
What is the delta, Sean, between us making the machine and us going out and buying one? You generally gave that, and I thought in your
Yeah,
State of the Union.
Yeah, it was a couple $100 more if you looked at a white box or a manufacturer, HP or Dell, of the same spec. You could certainly buy a machine of a lower spec for less. And you do sometimes see crazy deals from Dell especially on machines. And most of the time we find those are people, or they're selling in quantities of 10 or less.
Okay, so
You
vetted out their opportunity here?
We have, and honestly, I think that, I've come to really like the internship program we have in the summer. I think that we really do get some good machines at a good price, and I like to think we really do provide a good opportunity for the kids that participate in that.
Well, that's the bonus, is they get
That's
the
the-
education of actually getting some technical hands-on.
Yep, yep.
Good.
And those kids help us out during the year, too, so it really has been a great thing for us.
Okay.
Really, I tend to
Sean,
think of it,
just as,
I tend to think of it as we get a bonus of getting cheap computers, and once we're
Yeah.
teaching the kids how to build things.
Well, exactly.
Sean, just a little bit of add-on to Todd's question. What's the average lifespan of the computer that we, on our refresh cycle?
We are planning 7, 8, even 9 years.
What's the average lifespan in the industry, in the corporate world?
It would be, I can speak for the industry I came from. They would be, now of course they're out of business now, but they would have been turning over machines every 4 or 5 years.
Sean, one of the things, can you explain, it's really your repair schedule, if I remember correctly, is not time-based. It's more based on the issue tickets when you start running into.
Yeah.
Can you go into that a little bit? So it's not a time-based thing that we get rid of so many computers, it costs us that time.
Right, there are two different things. The refresh schedule has essentially over time a plot of the labs in the district and when we plan to replace those in future years. But those aren't the machines we're throwing away. Those are the machines we're replacing. We're handing those down to classrooms. And the classroom machines that we're throwing away, we throw away based on our help desk ticket information. So we go through that, and this is in the packet as well. I didn't include all the data because it's like 20 pages long. But we look at machines that are costing us a significant amount of time and or dollars to repair.
Your floor, Todd.
Anybody else? John?
Sean, I was curious as to on page 578, it looks like your second line down is 500,330, other professional, nurse, legal, et cetera.
Yes.
I'm guessing you don't have computing accidents that nurses and litigation's involved, so I'm just wondering what...
Not as of this time.
Knock on wood. So what does that $191,000 represent?
The detail of that is on 579, and it's basically our annual support for our major vendors. Munis, which is our financial system, Follett, which actually has bought X2, so that handles student information, and our library services. Our internet access is in there. Sophos, which does our web filtering and our antivirus. Semantic, which is our backup solution. I left $1,000 in district-wide consulting. A few years ago, that used to be $10. I left $1,000 in there in case we need to make a call to a call that's not covered to Microsoft or Cisco. Deep Freeze, Deep Freeze is a security system we use. Our web hosting covers the cost to have our website hosted at a local hosting agency in Manchester. And the last two items are related to firewall support or switch annual support. So it really is right to use licensing and internet access.
Maybe a dumb question. We don't get any reduced rate for the internet provide, or through the, cable access, or?
We get quote-unquote educational pricing from the vendor on that. We also get reimbursement from E-rate services on internet access.
Thank you.
Chris?
As far as the middle school netbooks,
Yep.
is there a deficient amount of workstations at this point for people? I mean,
Sometimes, yes.
sometimes there's more of a demand than there are workstations right now in the library.
Yes. There's about 25 that are working, and there are certain air classes that are more than 25.
Okay. And the software line is way down this year, it looks like,
Yes.
about 30.
That's all Microsoft licensing.
So the fees went down this year?
And it's just simply that. They used to charge by computer count, and now they have this convoluted FTE calculation, and it's the model they use for higher ed, and the price just went down, strangely enough.
Lisa? Tom? Good. Back to you, John.
Thanks. Ron, you weren't here when we went down the panel.
No, I'm all set. I've asked a couple of questions.
I'm sorry?
No, I'm all set, thank you.
Okay. We've talked in the past about bandwidth issues and the ability of teachers to get to media on demand in real time. And as I've said before, that may not really be a budget issue, but it's the kind of thing that sometimes gets limited by the budget.
Yep.
Any insights on that over the past several months? Any
Well,
developments there?
Yeah, I think we've made some progress. We upgraded our bandwidth this year from a 9 meg, 6 bonded T1 lines to a DS3, which is 45 meg. And we know that there's more demand for online content, and we want to support as much of that as we can. We've noticed that so far this year we are running between 7 and as much as 10 meg a day usage on that 45 meg line. So we relaxed our filtering rules. We've created a filter light category, which allows more users access to more online content. Our Learn 360 program, which you probably remember, has a lot of online content available. We've opened that up at the high school and the middle school. So we've taken these sort of steps in this direction. We'll continue to monitor what that means in terms of bandwidth utilization, and we'll continue to open up web content as much as we can.
So just as an example, if there's let's use the Japanese tsunami for an example.
Mm-hmm.
Are teachers able to fire up their projectors or flat panels in the middle of a class period and get the latest from CNN for appropriate coursework?
It's a little bit of a long-winded answer. Some of the content is going to be available to all teachers regardless of what security privileges you have on bandwidth. Some of the content is going to be labeled something like high bandwidth, that would block it. If that's the case, you have two avenues. You can go to the library and you can ask to be temporarily put in this filter light group, and that'll allow you to access these sites. The other thing you can do is you can say, this site is of continued use to me and here's why, and the library reviews that site and they decide if it should be unblocked or not permanently.
Sounds like progress. Okay, great. Anything else from anybody?
Sean, as we look at the infrastructure of the district, where do you see issues coming up in the next 3 to 5 years? We always talk about the computers on top of the desk.
Yeah.
What about the wires under the desk?
I think all of our cabling is Cat 5e or better, so that handles gigabit speeds. We replace, we have $10,000 slated every year to replace network switches, and that seems to do a good job for handling those. Our server replacement schedule really does a good job of keeping the server level stuff up to date. I think the network infrastructure really is in pretty good shape. We just got the additional bandwidth. I don't think there's any major expenditures in that area, that aren't covered by one of the replacement schedules.
We had spoken a year or two ago about the way the district was configured in the sections. Have we made modifications to that?
In terms of how the bandwidth's allocated?
Yeah, and how it goes around, yes. This is around what-
Yeah, the district is configured in a spoke, and there's fiber that connects all of the schools, which is really a terrific solution. The bandwidth, we have our ISP line, which is 45 meg up, 45 meg down, and we have several other cable lines. One that we use to support public Wi-Fi access at meetings, one we use for Leo Linked, and one we use for elementary browsing. And so far, this solution has worked pretty well for everybody, I think. And if we want to combine cable lines, we can do that. If we wanted to pool Leo Linked and the elementary line and have one big line for them, we could easily do that. If we wanted to pool the cable and the ISDN lines, we would need a multiplexer. So we would need a $10,000 device, a router basically, to combine those. At this time, I'm not seeing a need to do that. I think we have enough flexibility with what we have. And the other issue with combining them is right now we have a failover. If the ISDN line goes down, I could put the whole district on the cable line in just a few minutes on the router, or vice versa.
Good. Is there anything that we should know that we haven't asked questions on? On
See
this?
what my Twitter feed says about that. I don't think so.
John?
Go ahead, Chris.
This probably requires a longer answer than I'm looking for, but
I'll try.
it used to be that the kids would go to a classroom and for a project, go and use the computer lab for research for a project and spit out thousands of sheets of paper on everything. Are they now emailing that stuff themselves, or are they still using thousands of sheets of paper to go back to later, or using the Google app in the cloud?
Yes, that's a longer answer. At the moment, students don't have email access. That's an issue that I'm sure that we will revisit again in the future. But there are ways for them to transfer files via a thumb drive. Via our student information system actually has a locker functionality where they can upload something to their teacher or to themselves on the student information system. So they do have a couple of different avenues to do that. There's also network storage available for students and for classes at all levels. So they have a few mechanisms to transfer, printing out 1,000 sheets of paper being one of them.
Okay.
Sean?
Go ahead.
What about student personal devices being used in the schools? I see this being the next, with the tablets being so easy,
Yeah.
kids taking notes on it the way.
That's a topic that we have started to discuss at Ad Council. We've had a little subgroup, and actually Mr. Parent and I are going to be visiting a couple area schools that do exactly what you're talking about to try to figure out what sort of experiences, positive and negative, they've had about that. But we certainly know that most students have a smartphone, right, with internet access and all kinds of power here, or have a laptop or an iPad. So we know this is an issue we're going to deal with. We have to deal with. We started at Ad Council, and we have this little group that's now actively looking into that.
How does that affect the network, though? Or does it?
It depends, right? There are students that have a laptop for some special ed need that only use it to take notes. They don't access any network resources whatsoever. We could allow them full network access where they would get a log on and they'd sign on and they'd get their home drive and they would get everything that they get as if they were using a school computer. Or the third option is we just allow them on the internet. We allow them on, one of the things that schools do is they'll have a separate internet for student use. And that would be an option as well to keep that traffic off the regular network. So it could be anything from not using the network resources to using all of the network resources. And that's part of what we have to work out.
Okay, thank you.
In relation to Ron's question, you said about smartphones. Mine asks me every time it comes near a Wi-Fi network whether I want it to join. I presume that's because if I get data that way, then I'm not paying carrier data
Yeah.
fees. Now, that being said, we've got tweets up here. I understand that a tweet actually went out this morning saying that there will be school today despite a power failure in South. So, clearly we're using it to communicate with faculty and people like that.
Yep.
All of which rolls up into, does this have impact on wireless capabilities inside the buildings so that we can communicate with faculty members without them having to pay extra data rates?
Right now, there are a few select wireless access spots throughout the building. In some cases, we broadcast the SID for these, and you can see it, and you can log on with your smartphone. In some cases, we do not. So there are some limited areas where people could do that.
I guess I'm thinking more about what it means going forward.
In terms of expanding I think one of the issues we have to deal with, this is a project we looked at a few years ago. We thought that, it would be actually pretty easy to light up some outdoor areas. But then I think the thing that really threw a wrench into it from my perspective was the Verizon guys telling me we're going to have 4G coverage here in Londonderry this year, in 2011. We already have a 3G signal that really permeates the whole high school now. And I'm not sure yet, to be honest with you, John, at what level a reliable 4G signal eliminates the need for a lot of wireless access. This is an example. Using the cell signal is not a cloud solution, but it's the same concept as one. I'm going to use somebody else's resources out there to do what I need to do. So
Sure, but
that's a big variable, I think, going forward.
At the same time, one costs on a per megabyte basis. The other one is more or less overhead.
That's true. That's true. And it may be in the end that what happens is we increase the wireless hotspots we have around the district, and we utilize the 4G signal in the other areas. Part of the reality is that our buildings weren't designed for the spread or the bleeding of a wireless signal.
Right.
So we try to be prudent about where we put hotspots, the band room, the gym, the cafeteria.
Yeah. Great. Todd?
Has there been any thought to, you mentioned that a lot of students have their own devices and so forth. Many places of employment out there in the world, they have your ability, no matter what computer you're on, you can, if you have access to the internet, it gains you access to the system, or at least to a limited portion of a system, just by logging in. Has there been any thought of that? So at least they would be able to, so instead of having to use a school district computer, they could actually use their own.
Some of our stuff is available already over the internet. X2 is available in full over the internet.
Okay.
That's certainly the big one. We recently had moved info, a lot of info over the internet, and we're working now to move more of the stuff that we have on info to be available out on the internet. So some of the key systems are there.
So as you migrate to, thin computing or cloud computing, that sort of thing, you're going to start seeing more and more move towards that in the future. So to me, the more flexibility you enable, so whether you have your own piece of hardware, it's kind of, it doesn't matter which piece of hardware you use, you could get into it from any which way you want. It's just once you're in, that's the security you need. Once you're in, and then limit what can go back and forth.
That's the model we followed with X2. We do host that data here, but the part of the system that handles login sits out on the internet, on the DMZ, on the other side of the firewall. So that's exactly the model we follow with that.
Okay. Thanks.
Yes.
Go ahead.
A broader question that may impact Nate and Peter as well. I was really happy that some of the school texts now are accessible online. When my daughter forgets her book, she can get online and we can get it. Is that part of a program when we buy the book, we get that as an add-on? And what are we looking at for trailing off to the point that kids no longer have books? It's all going to be online.
Good question. When we purchased recent district-wide series, math and several others, one of the things the committees looked for was whether or not the text or the homework or the workbooks were online. And so that was one of the selling points. I think what we're going to see in the future, more and more of the companies are going to be putting textbooks up online. And we'd be looking at a combination of handheld devices or tablets or whatever to enable kids to access that material. Now, Pearson is going to be probably a big player in this. In fact, Andy and I met with a representative 2 weeks ago, Andy, 3 weeks ago, I think. And there's going to be, they're going to have a conference soon where some of this stuff is going to get rolled out. I would foresee, as we move on down the line, more and more texts put up to be accessed on the internet or through a specific subscriber account. And I would imagine, like everything else, there would be an ongoing charge. But what it would do is allow the publisher to update a chapter instead of us having to buy a whole new textbook because something changed in science. It would be able to allow us to keep more current. And also, the ones that we have seen have interactive components too, so that you're not just open, our traditional textbook, there's the page and there's a picture. There are interactive components in it that allow the student to interact. And just on the, for instance, on the reading, they can highlight a word, a picture of comes up of that particular word or a definition. There's an entire interactive component. You can conduct experiments online. So I think it's going to be a very exciting type of thing. The other thing that I've seen, and it's more prevalent at the college level, is a publisher will have their entire library, so to speak, online. And so you could click on a topic, you can go through the text, select chapters from a variety of different texts, and make your own textbook, and then have it printed up. So I think there are going to be a lot of things coming down the line. And I think part of what we're trying to look at that stuff, and I think we have to look at all in combination. So from what the IT guys tell me and Andy tells me, and I think we all know, the price of tablets are going to be coming down. So you take that along with the access of textbooks on the internet or subscription, you're going to wind up having kids coming with a tablet or a netbook, and they're not going to need backpacks anymore. So if you've got shares in a company that makes backpacks for students, you might want to begin to sell them and move it out. And it'll become a very efficient and effective way of doing it. So all that stuff is coming down the line. It's going to be interesting to see how they do the price points on these things, but it does hold, I think, quite a bright future. So in the not too distant future, everything's, I think, going to kind of go that way and allow that to happen. The interactive nature is really, really neat. And I think you can do that. Plus, we've seen it where teachers can, if I remember correctly, could integrate their own podcasts into the text. So a kid then would be working on the text and then can click on it and get the teacher's podcast regarding that particular topic. So it's really fascinating stuff.
It's going to be a lot more expensive when the dog eats the tablet as opposed to the homework.
Yeah. Pretty much. Absolutely. Pretty much.
I don't know anymore. I mean, given that a set of textbooks can run $100 a unit, you get pretty close to tablet price pretty quickly.
It's, I think Steve coined the term, it's a number of months back, called Yankee ingenuity. We like to be right near the cutting edge, but we want to wait to see who jumps off the cliff first and what works and what doesn't work and learn from their mistakes and utilize that. And I think just like with everything else in technology, and I'm as close to a Luddite that you're going to find.
Though there are several tweets on here from Mr. Greenberg.
Yeah, there you go. That the price points will drop so that it'll come to a point where it will be very cost efficient and cost effective, and I think they'll begin to drop in a very rapid fashion as we go through. But I have found that I don't want to offend anybody in the room or in the community. I've found that oftentimes software salesmen are very much like that traditional used car salesman in the Madras jacket, and you just got to be very careful about what you're buying and whether or not there's sawdust in the crankcase. So I think we try to be very prudent as we move forward, but with our eye on the future and doing this stuff. Just to not to extend this, but to piggyback, some of the stuff that Kim talked about, the tablets or the interactive devices some of our kids are using are absolutely fascinating. And our little 3- and 4-year-olds, and in fact, we've got a video which we'll bring to the school board, are using these devices in amazing ways and being able to communicate. And their children who, not that long ago, would not be able to communicate, and are able to communicate, and are able to communicate in an efficient and effective way by using assistive technology. And it's just fascinating to watch. Really cool stuff.
Anybody? I guess not. Great. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Need anything else?
Just a reminder, we have, our next meeting is December 13th. The topics will be building and grounds, capital leases, district office, and food service.
Okay, so that's a cookie night.
Could be,
Yeah.
could be.
Okay, do we need a non-public this evening?
No.
Okay.
Make a
Motion to
motion
adjourn.
to adjourn.
Motion by Ron, second by Nancy. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. We're gone.